Right, so good morning, grade 12. Today we are starting with our novel North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. I hope that you are ready and that you are not filled with trepidation or anxiety when it comes to doing our novel. I'm hoping that you will find it very enjoyable. So we've already spoken about Elizabeth Gaskell and her context and her personal situation, which we are going to see is translated onto the pages of our novel. And I'd like to start by just discussing how we are going to approach this. I'd like you to read in big batches of 10 chapters at a time. You can of course break that down for yourself into 5 chapters at a time. I strongly recommend that you get in the habit of reading at least for 30 to 45 minutes every day before you get started in your homework or your studying or your revision or whatever else tasks you need to do. It's a good habit to get into. Now, I just want to start again just by revising what we've said so far about our title, North and South. And when we speak about North and South, the South is of course referring to the southern rural parts of England. That is where you find your landed gentry. You have your old aristocratic families who are landowners. You have your agricultural workers. The South represents tradition, and everything is pretty much slow and laid back. The class is of course very big in the South. And then North, as in North and South, the North is referring to the industrial cities in the north of England. You have your capitalist manufacturers, you have your poverty-stricken mill workers, you have the sense of the future, progress. Think the Industrial Revolution as we spoke about. You have the rise of the middle class, your entrepreneurs, your factory owners, and so on. So there's a sense of the North representing modernity and the South representing traditions. Already you can see a lovely little contrast there. And then I also want you to take note of the fact that the North and the South are divided not just along geographical lines, but also culturally. There is a vast difference between the two. So I think that about covers where we are going with our novel. And then I just want to briefly touch on some of the themes. Well, there are quite a few themes and recurring ideas which I want you to be on the lookout for in every chapter, because those are the things, those are the examples that you are going to use when you are writing your literary essay, which is going to prove the points that you are making. So we'll start with the obvious ones, love, because it is a romance ultimately, which Elizabeth Gaskell uses as a vehicle for her social commentary. We have social class, which features throughout our play. There is the concept of home. And when we talk about home, I'm thinking of the family. I'm thinking of, because there are several different families, I'm thinking of parent-child relationships. There's also the theme of compassion and forgiveness, a very big theme, compassion and forgiveness. There is man and, I don't really like man, let's say people, and the natural world. When I'm talking about the natural world, I'm talking about nature. Already you can see the link with the south, where the country people are living far closer to nature than people in the north would. There's also the theme of pride in its various forms, also gender. And when I'm talking about gender, I'm talking of your masculine roles and your feminine roles. I'm talking about your stereotypical Victorian woman, your stereotypical Victorian male. Okay, so please be on the lookout for that. And then also authority versus rebellion. And we're going to see rebellion coming through in different forms. We're going to have our protagonist, Margaret Hale. We're going to have a brother, Frederick Hale. And then in a different way, we will have the factory workers when they go on strike. Then the authority is not only about the upper classes. Authority we're going to see even in the form of the factory owner, like John Thornton. So there's going to be quite a lot that I want you to constantly be looking out for. And don't read passively, read actively. Be constantly on the lookout. Make your notations as we go along. And most importantly, don't wait for me to initiate or engage a discussion on a particular point. Feel free at any time to interject, and at the end of the day, I would really like you to enjoy the novel. It doesn't matter that we are in the 21st century. It doesn't matter that we are in Southern Africa. I still think that in certain aspects, humans are humans. See now I'm digressing. And then of course we have the other theme of tradition versus modernity, modernity versus tradition. And then the last two that I want you to be on the lookout is religion. And there is that thread of religion, clear religious overtones that runs throughout. And the last one is death. Why am I smiling when I'm saying death? Because there are 5 deaths that occur in the novel, and that's quite a lot. And each one of them affects our protagonist in a different way. So I really need you to be on the lookout for that. So now, in chapter 1, which is entitled Haste to the Wedding, and I think of those as epigraphs because they give us insight into what is going to happen in the chapter. And haste to the wedding of Edith Shaw to Captain James Lennox. So I'm just going to focus on particular lines, and you will refer to this. And don't forget, the onus is on you to do the pre-reading before we do any kind of discussion of the chapters. Okay, your notations is going to help so much with your consolidation and your understanding. And when I start giving you your practice literary essays to write, they're going to come so easily. I am expecting nothing less than a B+ from my learners, so I want you to be on your A game. Okay, so in line 1, the first person speaking is our protagonist, Margaret Hale, and she's speaking to Edith. Now, I want you to understand that the girls are both 19, and Margaret had lived with them for 10 years. And Margaret, in essence, she had left her family to be a companion to Edith. Now, it sounds a bit crazy, right, to give up your parents to go and live with your cousin. But I want you to understand it was very advantageous to Margaret because it was a step up. She was moving into a family where you would be pampered and life was really, really good. A very affluent family that she had moved into. But now that Edith is getting married, now things change, and now Edith has got to prepare to move back home. She's going to go and live in Helston with her parents in the country parsonage, where life is simplistic, where life is horribly simplistic, where things are, I'm not going to say borderline poverty, but where they have to do without a lot. And so Margaret now has to travel from that world to this world. Okay. We're going to see she does have a very positive outlook. She's filled with all kinds of ideas of how she's going to make this work and the charity work she's going to do, and how, you know, it's going to be an exciting new chapter. And the funny thing is that Edith isn't there for her in the sense that she is able to sit and discuss her plan. She's the one who's sitting and listening to Edith about the wedding and the excitement of the wedding. And I think, to be fair to Edith, this is, of course, the highlight in a young Victorian woman's life. That is what you are raised for. That's what you are groomed for. One day you will get married and you will have your own home and you will run your home and you will bear children, and that's the sum total of your life. And so Edith is at that point. Margaret is not. And in that first 4 or 5 lines, they describe Edith, and she's curled up there, and it's a very feminine description. We have soft fabric, we have ribbons, we have silken curls, and please note, even in line 4, she's wearing white muslin, your epitome of your virginal, feminine girl, for lack of a better word, right? And lines 12 and 13 speaks about the sweet qualities and about the charm Edith possesses. So Edith is what your Victorian girl would aspire to. You're not stroppy, you don't have attitude, and you do as you are told by your mother, and you are excited, you are delirious at the thought of getting married. And from line 16 to lines 19, there is something which is quite interesting, and it speaks of the fact that James Lennox, he is based in Corfu, which is in Greece, and that's where Edith is going to live. And it says then, and I think I should read it, it says in line 16, life at Corfu, where his regiment was stationed, and the difficulty of keeping a piano in good tune, a difficulty which Edith seemed to consider as one of the most formidable that could befall her in a married life. So the biggest problem that Edith could envision was ensuring that her piano does not go out of tune in that salt air, that she's still able to play and entertain guests. How is that a major problem? But what that tells us is that Edith's life up to now has been so pampered, and she's been so cosseted. She has no idea what real problems are. Okay, and we're going to see that's in such contrast when we get to Malton, when we get to the north, when we get to factory workers. And then page 1 ends with again the description of Edith all rolled up and curled into the soft ball of muslin and silk ribbons and blah, 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 just like a little kitten. You know, what a wonderful life Edith has here. And if we go to page 2, it starts off with Margaret having these ideas about what she's going to do once she's living in the country parsonage. And we find that she is unable to speak to, and I'm in line 6, but in default of a listener, she had to brood over the change in her life silently. She's unable to share with Edith, and I get the idea that maybe Edith is a bit self-centered, Edith being that way because Margaret is there for her and not vice versa. Okay. The positivity that she feels towards going back to Helston is in lines 9 and 10, as she thought of the delights of filling the important post of an only daughter in Helston parsonage. So there isn't dread as yet. Okay. And lines 12 to 14 again to me highlights Victorian etiquette. It says her Aunt Shaw was talked to the 5 or 6 ladies who had been dining there and whose husbands were still in the dining room, blah blah blah. I think what is highlighted for me here is that theme of the female roles, because the two sexes have dinner together, and then the women retire, they leave the men at the table, and the men are the ones who can now, with their whiskey and their cigars or their brandy and their cigars, they can now freely discuss politics and business and finance, things which delicate feminine ears are not meant for, are not meant to hear. You see, while the women, they would retire to the drawing room and they would just talk about trivialities, about superficialities, about little bits of froth. Okay. And then even in line 1819, where it talks about it's just not proper to go and visit someone. You don't call on someone before lunch because that's just good manners. Because these ladies of leisure, they get up late and their maids draw baths for them and help them dress and do their hair, and they are only really ready to receive guests after lunch. So etiquette really governed the way they lived. And if you go down to lines 22 into 26, I think, where it's speaking about Captain Lennox he's arriving late by train. And then line 23 says, although she was a spoiled child, she was too careless and too idle to have a very strong will of her own, and gave way when she found that her mother had absolutely ordered those extra delicacies of the season, blah, blah, blah. And the idea is that your stereotypical Victorian woman is weak-willed. She does as she is told by her parents. Once she is married, it will be her husband who will make the decisions for her. And again, going to be in wonderful contrast with our protagonist, Margaret. Later on, we see that she is weak-willed. Her mother decides now. And then the last 4 lines, I think it's from line 30 on, still on page 2, where it speaks about Mr. Gray, the gentleman who always took the bottom of the table at Mrs. Shaw's dinner parties. And just the idea that the table is arranged with the head of the table on the left-hand side and guests and family in order of importance. So the less important you were, the further down the table you sat. And poor Mr. Gray, who always took the bottom of the table, probably just to make up the numbers he would be invited, asked Edith to give them some music in the drawing room. Again, this is considered very genteel entertainment for the upper class. An accomplished young woman should be able to play a musical instrument. Okay, then on page 3, in the first 6 lines, we see an example of maternal pride surfacing, because we have Mrs. Shaw, I beg your pardon, Mrs. Shaw speaking, and she says, of course, and this is line 6, of course, without any maternal partiality, bias, I foresaw that the dear child was likely to marry early, indeed. And the pride stems from the fact that the mother says, why does the mother say she knew her child was going to get married very early? because she would have received many proposals. Why would she have received many proposals? Because she was an extraordinary, pretty, attractive young woman. And then the mother says, I was sure she would be married before she was 19. I'd had quite a prophetic feeling when Captain Lennox, and here the voice dropped into a dramatic whisper. And I'm just drawing your attention to that because even there we see that formality. This is going to be a son-in-law, and she still refers to him as Captain Lennox. And then she says, the course of true love in Edith's case had run remarkably smooth. And you know that that's reference to Romeo and Juliet. The course of true love never did run smoothly. They've had no problems. They've had no hiccups along the way. Mrs. Shaw had given way to presentiment, as she expressed it, and had rather urged on the marriage, although it was below the expectations which many of Edith's acquaintances had formed for her, a young and pretty heiress. So, marrying Lennox is a one step down, maybe 2 steps down. She's young, she's pretty, she's wealthy, and she's marrying this man. While being in the military maybe is nothing to look down on per se, but there isn't the financial status that goes along with it for obvious reasons. In line 16, but Mrs. Shaw said that her only child should marry for love, and sighed emphatically as if love had not been her motive for marrying the general. So we get the idea there that maybe her parents had some say in that, because we are aware that there's quite a gap in age between Mrs. Shaw and her husband. Mrs. Shaw enjoyed the romance of the present engagement rather more than her daughter. So it seems as if she was almost living vicariously through her daughter and enjoying her daughter's whole romance into marriage. Yes. And then I would also like you to pay attention, in line 27. Yet had anyone come with a fine house and a fine estate and a fine title to boot, Edith would still have clung to Captain Lennox. So Edith is marrying for love, and that's something admirable. Okay, she's not being coerced into marrying him. Then, if you go down to line 29, when it was over, it is possible she might have had a little qualms of ill-concealed regret that Captain Lennox could not have united in his person everything that was desirable. So, there's still the idea that Lennox is not the full passage, right? In this, she was but her mother's child. And I find that very striking, because it's saying that Mrs. Shaw didn't love her husband when she married him. So maybe it was about security, maybe it was about pleasing her family, but it wasn't for love. And then the confirmation of that in line 33, who, still talking about Mrs. Shaw, who after deliberately marrying the General Shaw with no warmer feeling than respect for his character. So she didn't marry him because she fell in love. She married him because she respected him. And I don't know what you think about that, but maybe I'm just a romantic. I think one should always marry for love. That's just my opinion. Right, then we go on to page 4, and we see pride again. And I'm going to, maybe just for the first few chapters, draw your attention to the different themes, because I want you to be able to spot them, okay? Or else it's defeating the purpose if I draw your attention to everything. And the reason why I'm saying it is pride, if you look in line 3, this is clearly Mrs. Shaw speaking, and Margaret is listening into the conversation. I have spared no expense in a trousseau, were the words Margaret heard. So there's pride because the mother's bragging about the very lavish trousseau they have put together for Edith. Now the trousseau, in case you are not familiar, is what the bride-to-be's mother buys and prepares for her, so that when she moves to a new home, she has linen, she has clothing, she has maybe a starter kit, I like to call it, for when she moves into her home. Okay, and then in line 7, we have one of the women who are present saying, in fact, let's read it. "She's a lucky girl," replied another voice, which Margaret knew that to be of Mrs. Gibson, a lady who was taking a double interest in the conversation from the fact that one of her daughters having been married in the last few weeks. Okay, and so she's still very much caught up in the wedding fever. Helen, line 10 now, and I'm going to read 10 till 14. Helen had set her heart upon an Indian shawl, but really when I found what an extravagant price was asked, I was obliged to refuse. She will be quite envious when she hears of Edith having Indian shawls. What kind are they? Blah, blah, blah. So you can see that class and finance, they kind of go together. See, so this Mrs. Gibson isn't quite where they are because she was unable to purchase this rather extravagant item for her own daughter. And then if you go to the end of page 4, from line 31, Margaret looked around upon the nursery, the first room in that house with which she had become familiar 9 years ago, when she was brought all untamed from the forest to share the home, the play, and the lessons of her cousin Edith. And when she says untamed from the forest, she's obviously referring to Helston, which is deep country where they have the woods. And just the use of the word unrefined is telling me that she was somewhat lacking in social graces and etiquette, and it was because of her time living with the Shaws that Margaret has become refined and quite the young lady, which she was not. Okay. On page 5, in line 4, she recollected the first tea up there, separate from her father and aunt, who were dining somewhere down below. And that's so stereotypically upper class, who kept their children separate from them in the nursery. That's where they spent their time with the nanny, and they would only, when the children were clean and bathed and fed, they would get to spend some time engaging with the children, and then off they were carted back to the nursery. So I think that Elizabeth Gaskell sets the tone by really going into quite a bit of depth with the upper class and how they are living. And I think the reason why she does that is because it's going to make such a beautiful contrast to what is waiting for us later on. I then also want to just move down a little bit. If you can go down to line 18. Then the little Margaret had hushed her sobs and tried to lie quiet as if asleep, for fear of making her father unhappy by her grief, which she dared not express before her aunt. And so her initial arrival at the Shaws was not a happy time for her. And I find it very interesting. Lines 19 into 20. For fear of making a father unhappy by her grief. And you're going to see what I mean by this later on, because to me, from the very beginning, Margaret has been very conscious of not upsetting her father. And to me, it's almost as if from a young age, Margaret has been like to some extent, of course, a miniature adult, where she is concerned about adults instead of her parents being that concerned about her. And it's all going to become clear as we proceed, but please remember that. On page 8 in our chapter, page 8, if you go down to line 7, no one thought about it. No, let's go back to line 6. So she arrives at the shawls. Her aunt asked her to stand as a sort of lay figure on which to display them, as Edith was still asleep. No one thought about it, but Margaret's tall, finely made figure in the black silk dress which she was wearing as mourning for some distant relative of her father's, blah, 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 set off the long, beautiful folds of the gorgeous shawls, blah, blah, blah. What's happening here is I want to draw your attention to the fact that Margaret is not really noticed as being an attractive girl in her own right. And neither is she appreciated because all the attention is solely on Edith. Now, at this point, I'm not going to stick my neck out and say that she's being treated like the poor relative, which I don't believe she is. But the focus is on Edith and not on Margaret at all. Then, in the last paragraph on page 6, her aunt was so much absorbed from line 28 in asking Mr. Henry Lennox, who had not been able to come to, this is now the brother of the bridegroom-to-be, all sorts of questions about his brother, the bridegroom, his sister, the bridesmaid, coming with a captain from Scotland for the occasion. And so the military was considered quite a fine profession for men to be in. They were not going to make a lot of money, but unless you were some high-ranking officer, of course. But there was a clear bit of status, and to me that's just even conveyed by mentioning that the captain is coming from Scotland. On page 7, if you go down to line 8, if Margaret had not been very proud, she might have almost felt jealous of the mushroom rival as Margaret sank rather more into the background on her aunt joining the conversation, blah, blah, blah. So the theme here is one of class. And Margaret, so it's class and pride again, Margaret is too proud to envy Edith's new relationship. Because remember, as a young Victorian woman, you are also dreaming of the time when you will get married. But we're going to see that Margaret is quite a character. She is quite a character indeed. Okay. Now, why I mentioned class is because in line 10, as Margaret sank rather more into the background on her aunt's joining the conversation, she saw Henry Lennox directing his look towards a vacant seat near her. And I feel that that's saying that Margaret knows her place. So when the aunt joins in, she's got to take a step or two back. And I don't believe it's solely based in the fact that the aunt is much older and it's out of respect. I still think that it comes down to social standing. Okay. We're going to see that there's quite a bit of commonality between Henry Lennox and Margaret. And if you go to line 17, I'm still on page 7, he liked and disliked pretty nearly the same things as she did. And does that not sound like a good basis for a friendship? Margaret's face was lightened up into an honest, open brightness. By and by, he came. So her face just showed her delight when he came over to sit by her. And she wasn't your stereotypical Victorian female acting all coy and shy and I'm just going to play and tease this guy a little bit. She was happy to have him come over, and I think that has its pros and cons, but you are going to engage with that further. All right, then quickly, page 22 to 25. Well, I suppose you are all in the depths of business, ladies' business, I mean, very different to my business, which is the real, true law business. Playing with shawls is very different work to drawing up settlements. So Henry Lennox is a lawyer by profession, and he's making it very clear that male occupations are far superior to anything that women could do. So for women to be talking and playing with shawls is nothing compared to what he does in his law firm. Right, we've got a couple of pages to get through before we finish chapter 1. And on page 8, if you go to line 10, yes, said Margaret rather sadly, remembering the never-ending commotion about trifles that had been going on for more than a month past. And the trifles are just little unimportant details to do with the wedding. Line 12. I wonder if a marriage must always be preceded by what you call a whirlwind, this mad rush of activity, or whether in some cases there might not rather be a calm and peaceful time just before it. So her way of thinking is already not the norm. Margaret is definitely very different. She is marching to her own drummer, and it's only going to increase intensity from here onwards. Jump down to line 24. Oh, of course, he replied, with a change to gravity in his tone. There are forms and ceremonies to be gone through, not so much to satisfy oneself as to stop the world's mouth, blah, blah, blah. So I think that Henry Lennox thinks he is impressing Margaret when he becomes very serious and very stern when he speaks to her. So it's difficult to sum Margaret up and to know what I suppose would be the right approach to take. And then the last 5 lines on page 8 is very simplistic, and I want to read that with you. Oh, I never thought much about it, only I should like to walk, should like it to be a very fine summer morning, and I should like to walk to church through the shade of trees, and not to have so many bridesmaids and to have no wedding breakfast. I dare say I'm resolved against the very things that have given me the most trouble now. And what we see here, remember I said one of the themes of the natural world, is that Margaret has a clear appreciation and enjoyment of the natural world. I mean, who has heard of a bride walking to church through the shade of trees? So she enjoys, she is at peace when she is in nature. Okay. If you jump on page 9 to line 7, she cut his speech rather short by saying, "It is natural for me to think of Helston Church and the walk to it rather than of driving up to a London church in the middle of a paved street." And what's happening here, why she is saying that, is because she did not like the way that Mr. Lennox was analyzing her character, almost like he had to analyze her and put her into a box and ascribe labels to her. She definitely didn't want that. And in lines 8 to 10, what I just read now, we see that contrast between country life and city life, driving up to a London church, walking to the Helston church. And then he says, tell me about Helston. And I think it's quite clear to him that she has love, she has deep affection, maybe even a little bit of passion when she talks about Helston. And so being an intelligent man, he knows, let her speak about what she enjoys, and he gives her that opportunity. And when she does, line 16, the first thing that she says, only a hamlet. So it's far smaller than a little village. And then she describes the flowers, and then he says in line 19 and 20, and flowering all year round, especially at Christmas, making your picture complete, said he. And there's this mocking tone that I pick up, almost as if he's not really able to take Margaret quite seriously when she talks about Helston and about, her enjoyment of nature, because she does get annoyed and she says, I'm not making a picture, I'm trying to describe Helston as it really is, And then of course he is sorry that he peeves her. On page 10, the first two lines is, I can't describe, or the first two lines say, I can't describe my home, it is home, and I can't put its charm into words. So she loves her home town, her home hamlet. But you must remember that Margaret is viewing Hillstone through rose-tinted glasses. And the reason why I'm saying that is because she has spent so much time away, all right? And her recollections and her impressions have been of a far younger girl. So that when she goes back, it's not going to measure up quite as much. And he says in line 3, I submit, you are rather severe tonight, Margaret. So already we are gaining glimpses into her character. She can be quite forthright. She's definitely not coy. And she seems to be quite an optimist so far. But best of all, in line 18 onwards, I like Margaret's honesty. He says in line 16, shall you ride, drive, or walk? This is now in Helston. Walk decidedly. We have no horse, not even for Papa. He walks to the very extremity of his parish. The walks are so beautiful, it would be a shame to drive, almost a shame to ride. So she doesn't shy away from the fact that her parents don't have money. And then look at the gender role coming through again when he says, shall you garden much? That I believe is proper employment for young ladies in the country. So decorum is everything. Young ladies can do gardening, that's acceptable. But more than that, and it's probably just a little bit, that would be for inappropriate. And then if you jump to line 24, oh no, she said laughing, Papa's living is very small. Papa's income is very small. So she has a refreshing honesty, I think, about her. Page 11 of our novel, learners. I hope that you are still with me. We are almost done with this chapter. Edith played brilliantly. So Edith is an accomplished player. Remember, this is part of the refinement of being a young Victorian woman. In the middle of the piece, the door half opened, and Edith saw Captain Lennox hesitating whether to come in. This is now the intended, her intended. She threw down her music and rushed out of the room. This is now total excitement and impulsivity that takes place, leaving Margaret standing confused and blushing to explain to the blah, blah, blah. So, I like that. She's happy to see her guy. Okay. Lines 20 to 24. Mrs. Shaw had as strong wishes as most people, but she never liked to do anything from the open and acknowledged motive of her own goodwill and pleasure. She preferred being compelled to gratify herself by some other person's command or desire. And here I'm seeing modest pride. She doesn't do things because of pure motives. I just wanted to draw your attention to that. And then if we go to the last page of page 12, the end of the chapter 1, and we go to line 19, Margaret's quickly adjusted spirit lamp was the most inefficacious contrivance, though not so much like the gypsy encampment which Edith, in some of her moods, chose to consider the nearest resemblance to barrack life. And gypsies throughout the ages have always been the outcasts, the underdogs, the lowest rung of the social ladder. And that is how she viewed life in the barracks. After this evening, all was bustle till the wedding was over. And so the business, the chaos, the busyness would carry on until the wedding was finally over. And so that's chapter 1 of North and South by Elizabeth Kiska.